guys, today's video is something that I am very excited about because I have been kind of wanting to do a video like this for such a long time, and I don't know why I've been delaying it for so long. But the reason why we are doing it today is because this is actually going to be a collab video, and I'm collabing with probably someone that might be new to you guys. Her name is Raeann, and I've been watching her for probably a few months now. I think I found her when I was looking for reviews on the Killer Purr palette, because I like to look up reviews for palettes that I have reviewed pretty quickly so that I can see who else has kind of done reviews on the same palettes, because that way it's a good way to find new people that maybe I will enjoy watching, because I already know that we have something in common and that we like the same product. So that is how I found her, and honestly, I fell in love the first video I saw of her, and I even like messaged her and I was like,
can we be friends?
It was kind of awkward, the whole thing. Like, I kind of slid into her DMs and I didn't even know that she was subscribed to me, and it was a whole thing, but she's just one of those people that you just want to be friends with right away. She just has like this warmth to her, and I just feel welcome on her channel, and I like that she has a very positive vibe altogether, and her content is as well very interesting. She does a lot of the same things I do. She loves indie makeup. She reviews a lot of indie makeup just like myself. She's recently done some reviews on the new Sugarpill palettes as well as the new Melt palettes, and if that is something that is maybe interesting to you, I would highly recommend you go check out her channel, because she is just such a ray of sunshine, if you want to say that. So for today's video, this is something that, like I said, I've been thinking about doing for quite a long time, and it's kind of been like on my list of videos that I wanted to film, but I just haven't had like the right time come up. And so when I asked her if she wanted to collab with me, that was one of the things that I suggested that maybe we could do, and she was game to do that. So that is what we're going to do. So basically, did I even say what we were going to do? Basically what we're gonna do is I'm going to pick out a few palettes in my collection that I feel like aren't perfect, but that I really like. But if I could change one shade in that palette, like what would it be, and what would that palette look like if I had changed it, and the reasoning for why I'm wanting to change the shades that I want to change. So that is also what she's going to do on her channel. I don't know which palettes that she is going to be picking, but the ones that I have picked, I have 6 of them. You've probably seen me use all of these on my channel before, because these are some of my, I don't know if I would say favorite palettes, but they're all palettes that I really like. So let's just go ahead and move into the first palette that I want to talk about, and it's actually a palette that's right in front of me because I used it for this look. I did film this for my Instagram because I just wanted to kind of sit down and relax and play with something old and something that I hadn't played with in a while. So I played with all of my Kaleidos palettes, and the palette in question is going to be this one. This is the Futurism 1 Sci-Fi Green palette. So here's what the palette looks like. As you can see, a lot of the colors in this palette are quite similar. So my thinking was that I wanted to change out one of these green tones, because I feel like on the eyes, both of these are going to look basically the same. Whereas these two, you can definitely see more of a difference between these two tones right here, because this is more of like a greeny gold, and this is more of a yellow gold, which is what I have in the inner portion of my lid. Whereas these two greens, let me see if I can kind of give these a swatch as well. On the fingers, they look so similar. I mean, I get it. One is lighter than the other, but that's basically it. I mean, they still have pretty much the same undertone. So I thought that maybe if I could change up one of the colors out of those two, and instead make it something that would still play very well with both the yellow in this palette, or like the mustard in this palette, as well as the other green in the palette and the black, then that could probably make it for a more versatile palette. Now, obviously, you guys know I'm not really a fan of browns, but I really felt like having sort of like a chocolate brown in this palette would just go really well with the rest of the color story, because that color could be used to deepen up both the greens and the mustard with, and if you do that with the mustard, it could also allow you to make more of like a neutral, not a neutral look, but more of a toned down look if you use the mustard and the brown and the crease with the yellow kind of gold shade on the lid. Like that would be more of like a glam look, whereas then you could also have the grungy looks with the greens together. So I don't know, I figured that would be like a good substitute, I guess, for that shadow in that palette. Let me know what you think. I would love to hear your thoughts now that we go through these palettes. This is the palette that I felt like maybe makes more sense when you look at both of the palettes side by side, whereas some of the other ones that I've picked out, maybe you're going to look at the one that I've changed and be like, I don't really know if I would do that. It doesn't look like it belongs in the palette. So let's just move into one of those palettes that I want to talk about. So the next palette is going to be the Fun Size palette by Sugarpill. Now, the issue, I don't know if I would say the issue that I have with this palette, but the thing that kind of bothers me a little bit is, again, there are a couple of shades in there that just look so similar. And it's one of the biggest pet peeves of mine in palettes is when you have two shades that when put on the eyes, they're both going to look exactly the same. That is how I feel about some of the shadows in that palette. So the shadow that I wanted to change up is going to be the pink one. So there, as you can see, there's a couple of pinks in here. We have Level Up, which is a middle shade, and then we have Rage Quit, which is the one next to it. The reason I wanted to switch up this color with something else is basically because I felt like the tones of the other colors, the warm tone colors, just went very well together, and like this one just wasn't needed. So if I pull that one out, it really wouldn't change the color story that's already in the palette, but with adding something else in, it could add something extra to the palette. So the color that I felt like was kind of lacking in here was a very, very light pastel blue. Now that you see it kind of like in the palette, you're probably gonna go, I don't think that really looks right in the palette. And I think a lot of that has to do with the background, honestly, because that kind of like yellowy, mustardy kind of dirty yellow, it just doesn't go very nicely with the blue like that. But if you had changed the background to just black or something, I'm not sure how to do that, so I'm not going to do that, but just envision the background being black instead. I feel like it's all going to make a lot more sense because the color story, or the colors are going to pop instead of the background just going to pop against the colors. I hope that makes sense, but that color would go very nicely with both the purples in the palette as well as like the turquoise and the other blue that's in the palette. I feel like it could create a lot of different unique looks with that color, and it was something that in a pastel palette, which that palette kind of is, I felt like it's something that you would want to have in a pastel palette, and it wasn't in there, and instead there was another color that was kind of just taking up space. So that is what I would have put into the Fun Size palette if it was me kind of designing this palette. And I still think that you could have the same cover on the palette. You would just maybe have to change the color on the inside of it to sort of make it all just look a little bit more cohesive. So the next palette that I would like to change up a little bit is a palette that I definitely complained about when I was doing my review, and this is the Mini Controversy palette, which was the collaboration that Shane Dawson did with Jeffree Star. It's a little 9-pan palette, which the color story in it is just a little bit weird. Like there's a lot of very light mattes in it that just don't really serve much of a purpose except for being like a very light transition shade. Especially like the bone colored matte in that palette. I just feel like we all have that. We don't need that in a palette, and I feel like it's wasting space for something that could have been so much better. So the color that I would like to change out is going to be Cry on My Couch, which is the one in the middle on top. And I would like to change that out to something that's going to just add more to the palette. So another color, I still want it to be a matte shade because I feel like there's enough shimmers in this palette already, with there being 3 shimmers and the rest being matte, which I like that because in a small palette I like to have more mattes and shimmers, and in a bigger palette I'm kind of like, I'd like for there to be half and half. But if it is a small palette, I do like to have enough variety in my mattes, and I felt like the thing that would kind of add to this would be something that would basically go with all of the other mattes in this palette. And I thought that bringing in like a very pure red matte would just add so much extra to it and really give it that extra oomph that that palette really needed. You might again look at that palette and be like, that really does not fit into the rest of the colors in that palette. But if you start thinking about the kind of looks that you could do using that red along with the other colors in this palette, I feel like you would see that there's just a lot of opportunities. I mean, red goes very nicely with purple. If you mix red into blue, if you wanted to do something like that, it makes purple, so it's sort of like, it just sort of makes sense. And you could also use the green to deepen up the Root Beer shade, which is sort of like the middle transition shade, is more of a soft brown, and those two would make a beautiful crease. And then along with that kind of dark red bronzy shimmer, like you could really do something with both of those to create a bit of a smoky eye. There's so many things that you could do with that added shade, and I really feel like it added something extra. Now I know that they're probably going to change that palette into putting the stupid green shade in or whatever, but honestly I feel like the color story is still weird by doing that. So I don't know, I just felt like putting a red in here just makes sense in my mind. Let me know if you would have done something differently. Of course, everyone has different preferences when it comes to eyeshadows and the kind of color stories that they use, so I don't know. I just think it's very interesting to see what other people would do with like the same color story, so I kind of hope that Raeann and me are going to have some palettes in common. We probably won't because, I mean, odds are we're not going to have any that we both want to change. Who knows though? I mean, you never know. She might even have the fun size palette in her video because I know that she has that one, and I feel like other people would want to maybe change one of those colors too. Anyway, let's just move on. So the next palette I want to talk about is another palette that I also complained about in my review video or first impression video. I don't remember how many videos I did with this, but this is a purple palette from Colourpop. It is called the It's My Pleasure palette. So the only little thing that has been bothering me about this palette ever since I saw it is that it's a purple palette, but it doesn't have a purple matte. And it's honestly like, it's so annoying because to me, if I think of a color, that's the color I want to have in my crease for me to be able to do an all whatever color that look is. Like, I don't do all shimmer looks, so for me having a shimmery purple doesn't make it a purple palette. So honestly, the only thing that I would switch out is I would switch out the dark shimmery purple with a dark purple matte. So you're gonna look at that and be like, that's not much of a difference, but when you again think of like the looks that you could do with that color instead of the other color, so many more opportunities will come up and you're going to be able to get so much more depth in your looks than you would if you had just a shimmer in there. Because as someone who doesn't really like to do shimmers in my crease, I feel like a lot of people have the same thought and they don't like doing that either. And so having a dark purple shimmer as the darkest shade in the palette, it makes it really hard to use that as like a deepening shade, and you're really only going to probably use that if you're going to do a very dark purple smoky eye. So for me, it just makes this palette so much more versatile, and I just thought that I wish this is how Colourpop had done this, because I don't know, I just would have been so much more satisfied and it wouldn't be like annoying me so much for such a long time. So that is the only thing I would change about this palette, but now I honestly think that that palette is perfect. So we have two more palettes to go, and the next palette is going to be from Menagerie Cosmetics. You guys know I love Menagerie, but sometimes there's a couple of shades in the palettes that I just don't feel like is necessary maybe to always be in there, because they're always a little bit like similar, you know what I mean? So the palette in question is going to be the Killer Purr palette, and this is a very neutral palette, so like if it was me and I could change more than one shade, I probably would, but the color that I feel like is just a little bit redundant, that isn't really needed because you can get the same look with other colors in here, is going to be, what is this even called? I can't even see that on my picture. Hold please. Okay, so it's the shade Club. So this is basically the shade Club, and I feel like these two colors here are so similar and they could be used in the exact same ways. And I also feel like if you mix a little bit of this yellow into this one, you could basically get this shade. So I just feel like there's no need for this shade in a palette, and I think that since there's only two shimmers in this palette already, it just makes sense to add in another shimmer. And I felt like since there is a pop of color in this palette, actually a few pops of colors in this palette, so it makes sense to add in another pop of color to go with the other pops of color, so that you don't just have to have a bronze shade on your lid, because those are the only shimmers in the palette. So I thought I could put in a bit of like a light tealy turquoise shimmer. I felt like that would really add something extra to the palette, and it would go very nicely with the other colorful shades in the palette as well as the neutrals. And I just think that, I don't know, I just thought it would be fun. Again, it looks very out of place in the palette, and I just think it's the background of the palette, honestly. So I think that that actually looks really, really nice. And I really think that the looks that would come out of having an extra pop of color shimmer in this palette would just make it more interesting to work with, and maybe a little bit more challenging as well, which I enjoy challenging color stories, and I like trying to put together colors that maybe at first glance it doesn't seem like they go together. And I feel like that's one of those colors in that palette where some people would maybe be a little bit scared of it and not know what to do with it. But then, you know, if you play a bit with it, you could maybe come up with some really, really unique and interesting looks. So I thought that that could just be like an extra fun pop in that palette. Now, lastly, for the last palette is a palette that I've also complained about in the past, that I wish that this palette was just a little bit different, and this is the Zulu palette by Juvia's Place. I absolutely love that palette. I think that the color story is really, really, really nice, but the one color that I just feel like is so out of place, especially in a rainbow palette. The thing is, if it's a rainbow palette, you don't need to try to please everybody by putting in a brown. Let it be a rainbow palette. You know, that's totally okay to just have it be a colorful palette. You don't need to always put a brown into a palette for the people who always complain that there's no browns. Those people are probably not going to buy a rainbow palette anyway, even if there's a brown in it. So I just feel like that brown doesn't really make that much sense to have in a palette. I get how it could be used, but I feel like if you're gonna make a rainbow palette, just go all the way. So I would switch out the brown personally with something like a very dark navy blue, even more of like a, I don't know what the description of a darker navy would be. I'm trying to think, but I'm not very good at describing colors, but I want it to be a very, very deep, dark blue. And I feel like that could look really nice with basically all of the other mattes in that palette, and that they would blend very nicely together. It would add a lot of depth to all of the looks, which sometimes in rainbow palettes are sort of lacking. And I just think that it would, especially with the shimmers, it would just be such a nice contrast, and I think a lot of people would have preferred that. Let me know if it's just me, but I think that that palette would just really benefit from having a very, very dark blue in that palette. So those are the palettes that I would have changed up and what I would have changed. Again, I would love to hear your thoughts. And also, if you have not already checked out Raeann's channel, please go ahead and do so. If you want to see other maybe similar videos to this where I changed up the palettes, maybe not just one shade, but maybe if I try to rescue some palettes that I don't have in my collection that I feel like could have needed some help and I didn't buy them because they didn't, let me know, because it's fun to do. I really enjoy playing with like Photoshop and changing up palettes and stuff. So that's gonna be it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching as always. If you want to see something similar maybe that I have, here's a few more, I hope. And if you're new, I would love it if you would consider subscribing, and I will see you in my next one. Bye.